The arrival of Eric Bieniemy's offense and continued success of Jack Del Rio's defense will be the key to Washington's success this year. But which players within those units are going to be the most crucial of them all? That and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe on YouTube for free or wherever you get your podcast. And you can continue this conversation by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Get the first 2 weeks free and then figure it out if you like it. And if you want to stick around, you'll get access to upcoming film studies, notes, and data all through the season that go beyond the show. You can go one-on-one with me on game day, after game day, before game day. And I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, I appreciate your continued support for the show. And of course, you can also follow me on Twitter at dharrison82 if you would like. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. On today's show, we're going to bring back our weekly recap segment here at the end of the week as we get the season schedule rolling forward. And we're going to talk about the most important Commanders for the upcoming season. We're going to start that conversation with the most important defensive players suiting up for Jack Del Rio's Washington defense this season. Now, on Thursday night, I actually took to Subtext. I text all of my Locked On Commanders insiders, my lock insiders. It's what I'm calling you guys for now. If you've got other name ideas, by all means, throw them at me and we'll see what we can figure out. But I asked my lock insiders for their list of 5 most important players on the Commanders roster, not including the quarterback. Can't be a quarterback, but the 5 most important Commanders that are going to help determine the success of this team in the 2023 NFL season. I'm going to take that input. I'm going to take my own input, and we're going to come up with a list of 6 players, 3 defense, 3 offense. And actually, I'm going to throw in a special teams player in there as well. So I guess 7, really, right? 3 from each offense, defensive unit, and then 1 special teams player. Spoiler alert, the special teams player is the kicker, Joey Sly, right? Because, of course, he scores points. On the defensive side of the ball, though, we're going to start there, and I'm going to go 1 from each level. I'm going to go 1 D lineman, 1 linebacker, 1 secondary, because I feel like the entire unit's got to work well together. So the most important guy from each of those units, certainly probably one of the most important guys on this team, right? So starting things off up front in the trenches, the most important defensive lineman, and therefore the most important Washington Commanders defensive player in the 2023 NFL season is defensive tackle Daron Payne. For starters, Daron Payne has the most important ability down pat, and he's had it down pat for the last 3 seasons minimum. Started and played every regular season game for the Washington Commanders over the last 3 years. So first and foremost, just the availability to be on the field, stay on the field, that is just paramount, right? You got to be there. It doesn't matter how talented you are. If you're not there, you're not making an impact, right? But beyond that, he also improved his sack output every year for the past 3 seasons as well. Topped out at 11.5 sacks just in 2022, a career high for Daron, and he's looking to set a new career high here in 2023. We talked about what it'll take for the Washington defensive line to become a top 5 or better unit in yesterday's episode of Locked On Commanders. So everydayers, you'll remember that discussion. But remember, those projections are also with Daron Payne's absolutely amazing production in 2022, career highs in a lot of areas. So that production needs to be maintained, or it might even have to be improved upon. So the bottom line is Washington needs to see the same Daron Payne post-bag that they had pre-bag last season when he was out there in search of a deal. And certainly everything that Daron has said this preseason says that he's intending to do exactly that, if not better. And he's looked very good on the field when we've been able to see him there. Limited preseason action, right? But in practice, certainly looking the part. So far, so good on that front. And let's be real, another reason Daron Payne is going to be so important this year, again, when you go back to those defensive line projections, is let's be a little bit real about Chase Young here. Chase Young, even before his injury that took away a season and a half of his career so far, was at 1.5 sacks in his 9th game of his second season. That is not amazing production. That is not number 2 overall production from a pass rusher that you drafted that highly, expecting him to become one of the building blocks of your organization. So we've yet to see Chase Young play healthy this season, this regular season, because there's been no regular season game. So we can't cast doubt on Chase so much. But the bottom line is, if we look at the last time Chase was healthy, Chase was fully available, it wasn't exactly gangbusters numbers, right? So if Chase Young is going to improve, fantastic. But this team needs to prepare for in case Chase Young isn't improving from the last time we saw him in the pace that we saw him playing at before the knee injuries, or before the knee injury and the 2 knee surgeries. So they may need a better Daron Payne or John Allen or Montez Sweat. And if Daron Payne is playing at the same clip he was last year, whether Chase Young is getting better or not, he's still going to make life easier for John Allen, who's certainly steady and doing his thing, and Montez Sweat, who's looking to improve his ability to close pass rushes, turn more pressures into sacks this season, looking for a new contract himself as well. So for those reasons, Daron Payne, the number 1 most important player on the defense, as far as I'm concerned, certainly the most important player on the most important unit within the defense, right? So secondly, looking at the linebacker unit, the most important linebacker on this Commanders team as far as how it's going to dictate Washington Commanders' success in 2023, Cody Barton, the newcomer, the new guy. Again, we talked about him yesterday on our last episode, talking about who the strongest units are and who the units are that need to prove the most. The linebacker unit here with Washington Commanders needs to prove a lot, and Cody Barton is kind of going to be spearheading that effort to prove anything and everything they can to Washington Commanders fans, media, and honestly, mostly themselves, right? So Cody Barton's coming in here from Seattle. And again, according to the Seahawks media people that I've spoken to, much better fit for the Commanders defense than he was the Seahawks defense. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. But bottom line is, he's essentially coming in here to replace Cole Holcomb, who is now the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, in 2022, when Cole Holcomb got injured and basically eventually was off the team for the rest of the season, at the time of the injury, he was on pace for 167 tackles before he got injured. That's combined tackles, not solo, because if it was solo, that'd be a record-setting pace. The record being 157 solo tackles by Ray Lewis, and the combined tackle record is 214, currently held by Hardy Nickerson. So not quite on that pace either, but still 167 combined tackles, a very good pace. That is the production that Washington is looking for Cody Barton to come in and replace. And even more, it looks like they're going to expect him to be a part of the pass rush more than Cole Holcomb was. And they're looking to improve on the 140.2 QBR, according to PFF, that Holcomb was allowing in the passing game when he got injured last season. That's not a very good QBR to be surrendering when the max is 153.2 or 0.6. I can't remember exactly, but 153 point something. Bottom line, though, if the linebackers don't get better this season with the addition of Barton, that's going to stress the front end. It's going to stress the back end more, and it could lead to some breakdowns that offenses are going to take advantage of, or less aggressive pass rushing and more taxed pass coverages for the Washington Commanders defense. So certainly want to see this linebacker group at least replicate the success that Cole Holcomb was having when he was healthy, if not improve upon it. And again, if Cody Barton does become a better part of the pass rush compared to what Cole Holcomb was doing, that certainly is only going to help matters as well. So Cody Barton, number 2, for obvious reasons, more of a here's what you need to prove versus here's how great you are. Daron Payne, here's how great you are, and that's why you're important. So again, importance does not necessarily equal amazement, right? We're not talking about who the best players are. We're talking about who the most important players are. And I think Cody Barton, for those reasons, certainly one of the most important players on this defense. Third, going to the secondary, most important person in the secondary this season. It goes off of last season. Defensive back, safety, Kam Curl. After Washington lost to the San Francisco 49ers in December of last year, Coach Rivera was asked about not having Kam Curl on the field, and he simply said, quote, "We felt it," end quote. And yeah, Coach Rivera wasn't kidding. That game was the second time that a team had scored in the 30s against Washington's defense. The other was Detroit way back in week 2. So from September to December, that's how long it took for a team to score in the 30s, which is kind of okay in itself. But the thing is, Kam Curl was out for each of those games. In fact, when you look at the 6 games, which is just over a third of the regular season, that Washington gave up the most points in the season. So these are 6 games that opponents scored the most points in. You got week 16 at San Francisco, 37, week 2 at Detroit, 36, week 4 at Dallas, 25, week 3 versus Philadelphia, 24, week 17 versus Cleveland, 24, and week 1 versus Jacksonville, 22. Kam Curl was inactive for 4 of those 6 games, and all of those games but one was a loss. The 2 games that he was active for were teams scored in the top 6 against the Washington Commanders defense. The Eagles in week 3 didn't target Kam Curl one time, according to Pro Football Focus. And the Cowboys in week 4 targeted him twice. They got 1 catch against them for 1 yard. So Kam Curl on the field equals less effective offenses, equals less scoring, equals better chances for Washington Commanders wins. It's pretty much that simple. Confidence in the back end, whether it's in pass coverage or run support from Kam Curl, allows the players in front of him, either figuratively or physically sometimes, to play faster and with more confidence. You lose that and you lose more games. I think, period. That's basically just simple math. So those are the 3 most important defenders: Daron Payne, Cody Barton, Kam Curl, at least from where I'm sitting. Not the only important ones, right? Praise here is not shade elsewhere. And again, in the case of Cody Barton, especially, who is new, we get to see exactly what he's going to do fully in the Jack Del Rio defense. Doesn't necessarily mean 3 most talented players, just 3 most important for varying degrees of reasons. Kam Curl and Daron Payne, really, for what they do individually and how that impacts the rest of them. Cody Barton, because of what is expected of him and how that could impact negatively or positively how he performs. But I've got 3 most important offensive players coming up next as well. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That is an amazing deal for just betting $5. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer that you don't want to miss. Again, bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. And new customers, or all customers rather, bet $5 and you'll get $100 off of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV, all by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day. And every day is, once again, greatly appreciate you coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Continuing our look today at the most important Washington Commanders when it comes to the success the team is going to or not going to have in the upcoming season. We talked about the defensive tackle Daron Payne, linebacker Cody Barton, defensive back safety Kam Curl making my list. Now let's flip to the offense. And we went no quarterback here, right? And I told my insiders, no quarterbacks. Outside the quarterback, who are your top 5 when it comes to the most important Commanders players? And we'll look at some of their responses here in just a minute. But Sam Howell is an obvious, right? Most important position on the field. So Sam Howell's out of the running here. So just kind of put that disclaimer out there. Anyway, so without counting the quarterback, to me, the most important offensive player to Washington Commanders' success in 2023 is second-year wide receiver Jahan Dotson. And not only is Jahan Dotson my most important offensive player, he's also a guy who believes that he is in for a breakout season. And I'll tell you right now, everything that we've seen in preseason, everything we've seen in training camp really kind of supports that. But to explain to you why Dotson is so important to this Washington Commanders offense, I'm actually not going to use Dotson's stats. I'm going to use percentages and data on other receivers, starting with Terry McLaurin. In the 12 games that Jahan Dotson was on the field, his rookie season with Terry McLaurin, Terry had a 58% success rate in the passing game and a 9.8 yards per attempt average in the passing game. In the 5 games without him, after Dotson suffered the hamstring injury against Dallas, McLaurin's yards per attempt actually went up. Weird. But his success rate dropped 4%. Why? Because the Washington Commanders had to lean on Terry McLaurin more as the primary deep threat, which limited his ability to be a 3-level threat, which is really where Terry McLaurin shines the most. You can use him in the screen game, short game, quick game, intermediate game, and you can use him down the field. But without Jahan Dotson on the field for those 5 games, the Washington Commanders had to lean on Terry better or more as a deep threat, primarily compared to when Jahan Dotson was on the field. So again, that raised Terry McLaurin's yards per attempt average, but it lowered the amount of times they threw the ball to Terry, and it ended up in a successful rep. Likewise, Curtis Samuel's yards per attempt also went up when Jahan Dotson wasn't on the field, but his success rating dropped below 50% because, again, when Jahan Dotson, one of your, not your only, right, but one of your primary deep threats, or at least even if you're not using him as a deep threat all the time, someone that the defense understands they have to account for that deep threat possibility. When he's not on the field, your other receivers now have to pick up that slack, whether it be Curtis Samuel, whether it be Terry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown stepping up into a role, whatever it is. And the problem with that, again, is when you're using those guys who are, again, screen, intermediate, short passing game studs, those guys now no longer can produce in that area of the field as much. And the drop off from wide receiver 3 to 4, 5, 6 is usually pretty steep. So with Dotson, Samuel, and McLaurin all in the field, they all had success rates over 50%. Without him, Terry McLaurin's dropped below 55% and Curtis Samuel's dropped below 50%. So having all three of those guys on there, more of your passes are meeting success. And really, so the question is it better to get 10 yards more than half the time, or is it better to get 20 yards sometimes, but less than 10 most of the time? I think the clear answer from a consistent production standpoint is obviously you want to get 10-yard gains more often than not, 7 to 10-yard gains more often than not than you do the occasional deep shot, because you're essentially forced into deep shots, because without Dotson, you're also likely looking at more third and long. So you might get a 12-yard gain, but a 12-yard gain on 3rd and 15 is not going to be nearly as effective as a 12-yard gain on 3rd and 8, because Jahan Dotson was on the field to help you get that 2 yards, which hopefully you're getting more than 2 yards anyway. But I think you understand the analogy and the comparison. Bottom line is the more the defenses have to cover, the less they can commit to rushing the passer, or when they do, the more likely it will be that Sam Howell can exploit it. So having Dotson on the field certainly has a trickle-down effect around the rest of the offense and even to the quarterback. Of course, ideally, you want all three of these guys on the field, right? And unfortunately for Terry McLaurin, that may not be the case in week 1, but we'll see more on that next week. So make sure you come back for more of those updates. My second most important offensive player for the Washington Commanders when it comes to them having success in 2023, running back Brian Robinson. So we're going back-to-back second-year players here on the Washington Commanders offense. That's how important the youth on this team really is on the offensive side of the ball. I think very simply, to put it very simply, the running game can be a young quarterback's best friend. We know tight ends are, quick passes are, play action is, read options are. All of those things are going to be a part of the Commanders offense this year, but we especially need that running game to be a part of it, especially against tough opponents. In 2023, Washington plays 4 games against opponents that were top 10 against the pass last year, just simply in yardage: Miami, New England, Buffalo, and Chicago. New England, Buffalo, and Chicago were also top 11 against the run last year. 5 other games this year, so not including those 4 games, 5 other games this year come against defenses that were top 10 in interception rates. 3 of those teams were also top 12 in rushing defense. 2 of all of those teams were also top 10 in sacks per attempt. So you're facing some pretty solid defense. So that's 9 games out of 17. So you have 8 games that are not against these types of defenses, but more so than not, Sam Howell is going to be facing a defense that is elite somewhere against quarterbacks. And of those 9, 6 of them are also going to be teams that were top 12 in the rush. So pretty good defenses on the schedule coming up for the Washington Commanders. If Washington is going to take some pressure off their first-year starter, they're going to need to find a way to manufacture the running game against some of those guys, and that's not always going to be easy. But it starts with the primary ball carrier, which we expect to be Brian Robinson Jr., though he's not going to do it alone. Speaking of not doing it alone, not just as a ball carrier, but also the offensive line. And for me, the number 1 player on the offensive line that's going to help determine Washington Commanders' success, center Nick Gates. And that's why he's our number 3 player on the offense that is going to contribute to the Washington Commanders' success the most in 2023. First of all, he's going to start helping set protections. That's traditionally a center's duty. His attitude that he's bringing to the team, Logan Thomas actually talked about it in the locker room just this week. The attitude that he's kind of bringing to the team, to the offense, to the offensive line is going to be incredible. That effort to be a dominant player, to be a warrior on the battlefield is going to be extra important, but it needs to be intelligent attitude. And I'm not saying it's not going to be, but this offense, I wouldn't expect this, not necessarily this offense, but any offense really, to survive many 15-yard penalties for extracurricular activities because Nick Gates loses his temper and lets someone get under his skin. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but attitude sometimes bleeds over a little bit. I've seen Ryan Jensen do it with the Buccaneers more than a couple times, but typically he doesn't do it so much that it's detrimental to the team. So Nick Gates certainly going to be a contributing part of that offensive line, and I think the attitude that he brings to the offensive line is something that we haven't seen here in the last couple of seasons, and something that they definitely need up front if they're going to overcome some of the growing pains that they're going to go through, because they have to go through. 4 out of 5 new starters on the offensive line, you have to expect growing pains. Again, we didn't forget about the special teams, but I can't go 3 guys there because there's only 3 specialists there, right? So I'll just name one. That's kicker Joey Slye. In 2022, Slye made 83.3% of his field goals. Amazingly, Washington actually won all but one game that Joey Slye missed a field goal in. that one non-win was a tie against the New York Giants. So technically, the Commanders are undefeated when Joey Slye misses a field goal last year. That's kind of a weird stat, but 5 of the 14 playoff games last year had kickers that had worse made field goal percentages than Joey Slye. Here are those 5. Kansas City had a worse field goal percentage. They also scored 29.2 points per game versus Washington's 18.9. Cincinnati, that was another one, 26.1 points per game. Tampa Bay, who won their division with a losing record. We've been there. We know that. Gross, you don't want to go there. Miami had 23.4 points per game, finished with a 9-8 record in the AFC. Minnesota finished with 24.9 points per game. So the bottom line is, if you're going to have a kicker with this field goal percentage that Joey Slye had in 2022, you're either going to need to keep pace with the top scoring offenses in the National Football League, or you're going to have to score at least a touchdown more on offense per game, and you're still probably going to barely make it into the playoffs. So the bottom line is, you need a more accurate Joey Slye in 2023 than you got in 2022. So that's obviously why he's going to be one of the most important players on this team when it comes to success on the field for the Commanders. Some interesting names that my insiders dropped. Obviously, they dropped all the names that I've already mentioned, but they also added the entire O-line and D-line. A couple of people said, I'm just going to use them all. And I totally get that. I totally dig that energy, because it's certainly true. A couple of people also said the entire secondary, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, getting the takeaways. I mean, that's why Emmanuel Forbes was brought in. That's one of the reasons Quan Martin was brought in, to increase the takeaways from the defense. So certainly could prove to be incredibly important. Terry McLaurin, which of course, who's going to discount the importance that Terry McLaurin brings to the field by himself. Eric Bieniemy, who's not a player, so he technically doesn't count, but I certainly get the motivation and the energy there. Emmanuel Forbes got an individual vote. Derek Forrest got some individual votes. Cole Turner got multiple votes, the tight end, which was interesting to me. But another second-year offensive player. So again, that youth on the offense certainly flexing. And then Jamin Davis got some mentions as well. Speaking of Jamin Davis, we had a new update on him and his court situation. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, wrapping up the week here on Locked On Commanders with the return of our weekly recap. Now that we're back in the regular season, we will be bringing back this weekly recap at the end of each week. But before we hit this week's recap, I do need to give an update on linebacker Jamin Davis. Nikki Javala of the Washington Post has been all over this story from the jump, and she tweeted Thursday evening, I think actually while I was recording my Thursday episode, because I mentioned that there were no updates at the time of my recording, but Nikki tweeted, quote, Jamin Davis's appeal of his reckless driving conviction was continued to March 4th, 2024. He is scheduled to face a jury trial on that date, barring a new plea deal or resolution with the Commonwealth beforehand, end quote. So that means no further legal issues for Jamin Davis this season. Any legal ramifications that he's going to face for his charges will be dealt with most likely during the offseason. Some of you will be happy about that. Some of you will not. And I get both sides of that conversation. Also on Friday, the team agreed to injury settlements with running back Jonathan Williams and receiver Kyrick McGowan, meaning that both players will come off the team's injury reserve list and they'll be free agents once they're healthy enough to play. They could re-sign with the team. So doesn't mean you've seen the end of them necessarily, but there's a little bit of a resolution to their situation. So now to our weekly wrap up. Again, every day, as you've already seen all these, so I greatly appreciate you. But in case you've missed any, Monday, I dropped my 53-man roster projection, which of course led us into Tuesday's actual 53-man roster announcement, which I reacted to. We talked about the presser, gave where I was right, where I was wrong, and where I was surprised. From there, it's really been a big roster week. But on Wednesday, we did talk about Ron Rivera's revelation to Albert Breer Sports Illustrated that he didn't know how good Sam Howell could be last season. And we also talked about hearing from team president Jason Wright saying that the team is not considering changing the team's name back despite petitions and fan outcry on social media. Thursday was all about the strongest parts of Washington's offense, which are the defensive line and the receiver group, and about the groups that have a lot to prove this season, the offensive line group specifically, and the linebackers. And of course, today's show, the most important commanders on the team that will ensure or potentially derail, hopefully ensure, but potentially derail the success of this season. We also heard from players this week like Logan Thomas, Mitchell Tinsley, and we shared some clips of Ron Rivera's press conferences as well. Plenty to catch up on. If you didn't get to all of it this weekend, we'll fire things back up Monday afternoon. I know it's a holiday weekend, but I am working Monday. I will bring you an all-new episode of Locked On Commanders, and it will be our first of our first game week. Not going to have a lot of game related topics, but we are going to have some other things. I'll be dialing up some preseason trends that we might or might not see in the regular season and why, and a final regular season record prediction, along with my first quarter preview for the 2023 NFL season. So a lot of stuff to talk about early next week. And then, of course, Wednesday, we're back at practice, Thursday, Friday, and then we got game day, man. So come back for all of that. In the meantime, send your questions or comments in the YouTube comments, on Twitter at dharris82, or if you're a Lock Insider, just text me. It's that simple. Don't forget, you can become a Locked On Commanders insider simply by heading to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Every day is one last time. Thank you for coming through on a consistent basis like you do and making me a part of your routine, your day. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind. I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.